Hi, and welcome to Roane County's Lunch and Learn series here in East Tennessee in Zone 7A. This is a free monthly series given on the second Saturday of every month at noon. For those watching from other areas, cities or parts of cities and towns in Roane County include Harriman, Kingston, Lenoir, Loudon, Midtown, Oak Ridge, Oliver Springs, and Rockwood. We're about 25 minutes from Knoxville, and the population is about 53,000. I'm Aileen, and I've been a master gardener for almost 6 years. I'm here to say I'm not a master at anything, but taking the 40 hours of gardening courses offered at our local extension office, which is affiliated with the University of Tennessee, has helped me learn a lot more about gardening than I did. As a master gardener, I have access to excellent research-based information about what I'm trying to learn or understand. You can learn more about how to become a master gardener in your area by contacting your local extension office. On this slide, I'm showing you some resources that you can check into. Here in Roane County, we have 2 Facebook pages, and there are 3 websites listed. Over the years, I've learned how much the Extension Office offers to our community, from farming to lawn care. It's all free. UT Extension serves the citizens of Roane County with educational programs in the areas of agriculture, family and consumer sciences, community resource development, and 4-H development. They're an outreach branch of the University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture, providing research-based solutions and information to the cities of Tennessee. Now, my Master Gardener group of Roane County is small, with about 30 members, but all of us try to do our part to help our Extension Office and to volunteer in local projects. Putting your garden to bed in the winter involves some basic things you all probably know, like cleaning up, mulching, and fertilizing if necessary. You can even use your leaves for composting or mulching. You may want to clean up and sharpen your tools for next year. Plus, getting your seed containers cleaned and ready for planting before it's too cold. Clean out those bird feeders and winterize your fountains. It's a great time to have a soil test, too. I encourage you to research more about those things that relate specifically to your garden. I'll go into some of these details more later. What I really want to emphasize is that you are always preparing for the following season. You can do as much or as little as your time and your desire allows. The more you get done in the fall, the less work there is to do in the spring. Here in East Tennessee, it's a lot cooler and less humid in the fall to work outside, so that's a great big plus for us. You could say that it's one of our busiest times in the gardens. What I thought would be interesting is to take you along with me to some of the things I do in the gardens I'm involved in to prepare for the following year. It really all depends on your gardens and the plants you have and what your future dreams may be. Let's get started. I'm always observing my gardens and noticing what's working and what isn't. What needs to be moved or taken out? Are there any gaps I want to fill in? What needs to be thinned or divided? Is there an invasive plant that needs to be removed? Are there problem areas like disease, infestation, water issues? What can I add next year to make it look better? Or what do I want to try that is different? I usually write notes or take pictures to remember. I keep track of my plants and garden designs so I can refer to them when planning or when caring for them. You can do something as simple as throwing your plant tags in a box or clipping them on a key ring. You can draw out your garden space with colors, or you can take photographs. You can make a book that has the plants and descriptions in them, or even get a professional design done. It's up to you based on your time, budget, and your desire. It's important to know your property and how you want to use it. What areas have full sun or shade? Maybe you want to add more shrubs or trees. It's always an ongoing process, and everything is always growing and changing. Do any of you recognize this plant? It's called heavenly bamboo, but it's not really so heavenly after all. I learned from my fellow master gardeners that heavenly bamboo is not a good shrub. It is invasive and poisonous. It's not a real bamboo, but an evergreen, and it produces bright red berries. It was introduced in the United States from China and Japan, but now it is classified as an invasive plant. It can easily spread from suckers and rhizomes, as well as from seeds from its fruit. So what does invasive mean? A plant that is both non-native and able to establish on many sites, grow quickly, and spread to the point of disrupting plant communities and ecosystems. Invasive plants have an impact on our water quality, the biodiversity, fish and wildlife habitat, tree cover, fire risk, and costs. Despite homeowners' best intentions of providing food for birds during the winter, Nandina is not the answer. The entire plant is poisonous, and the berries contain cyanide and other alkaloids that create the highly toxic hydrogen cyanide. I had 7. I liked them. They were pretty. I used the foliage to decorate during the holidays. You can even find these at nurseries now. I had a friend give them to me. They grow easily. I just didn't realize how bad they were for the environment. It wasn't easy, but my husband and I removed them. I still see suckers everywhere, so we'll have to keep up with those. It was hard work, but rewarding, and now I was able to decide what I wanted to plant in their place. Here are some other shrubs with berries you may consider. First, think about how tall you want them to be and how wide. What kind of colors do you want? Do you want something to feed the birds during the winter? There are many to choose from. Just do your research. Some of them may require a male and a female shrub to produce the berries. By the way, burning bush is also an invasive shrub. Another one I loved but learned not to plant. I thought I'd show you how to plant one of your shrubs. This is one of the areas that I had one of those Nandina shrubs. And so we dug it up, and I have a nice soft area. I've combined my lovely Tennessee clay soil with some garden soil, mixed it together. I added a little slow release plant fertilizer. And what you do is you just dig your hole the same depth as your pot, but twice as wide. And this is easy digging for me today because, like I said, we had already dug up a big hole over here. And I selected a plant that's a little different that I hadn't really known about before. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Covetine? Don't laugh at me. Anyways, it has some really interesting foliage, and it does flower, and it can tolerate some shade, which I have a dogwood nearby, so it gets some shade, not a whole lot, and it doesn't grow very tall, only 2 by 2, 2 feet tall, 2 feet wide.
So take it out of the container, and it doesn't look too root bound or anything. So I'm going to put it at the depth of the soil, and I can call this soil because I amended it. Otherwise it's red Tennessee clay. Now I've got some potter friends who love their clay, but us gardeners, not so much. So you just want to tap it down and keep the top of your plant level with the soil, and then come back in and mulch it. And there you have it. Pretty simple. Fall is a great time, really the best time to plant your shrubs.
In the fall, before I start cleaning out or digging, I check to see if there are any seeds I want to harvest for next year. Here I've found some parsley, zinnia, and black-eyed Susan seeds I want to harvest. I know they are ready because the pods have turned brown and are brittle. We have 4 different types of seeds. Open pollination, that occurs in nature naturally. It happens when a bird, insect, or even the wind pollinates plants. As long as the plants are separated from other varieties, open pollinated seeds will breed true to type. The advantage of open pollinated seeds is that you can save seeds and have them to plant from one season to the next. Heirloom seeds are seeds that are passed down from generations. The seed grows the same plant as the original plant. Then we have hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds are those that have cross-pollinated between 2 types of similar plants. Now, this can happen naturally in your garden if you haven't separated your plants from each other, or it can happen intentionally by human intervention. Seeds of hybrid plants are unstable and can't be saved for use in the following years. They will grow, but likely not too healthy, and they won't look like their parent plant. Then we have GMO seeds, and they are genetically modified organisms. They're created in a lab using sophisticated techniques like gene splicing. Instead of crossing 2 different but related plants as hybrid seeds do, the cross can be much more significant, like crossing a bacteria with a plant. This is done to create pest-resistant plants. I would recommend that you research the plants you want to save seeds from. They're all going to be a little different. For example, the black-eyed Susans and poppy seeds can be harvested and then spread that same fall. They like to have the cold weather to germinate. Other seeds need to be stored in cool, dry places until you can plant them indoors or direct seed outdoors once the soil's warm enough. Store them in a container like a jar or an envelope. In most cases, the dry pods can be pulled or shaken apart easily when you remove the seeds. And you don't have to separate all the chaff from the seed completely. You can just generously seed what you have all together, knowing that some of the seeds will germinate and some won't. The birds will eat some of them, and some of it will be chaff that will not grow anything. Now, on the next slide, I'm going to show you how I harvested some parsley. Now in the fall, you might be looking around your gardens and noticing that you have lots of beautiful plants, and you're going to hate to see the freeze take them. Well, one way that you can keep some of them is to take some cuttings, and Coleus is one of the best and easiest ones that you can do. You can multiply your garden plants that way. In fact, you can really do this any time of the year. You don't have to wait till fall. You might buy that special plant in the spring and you want to have more of the same thing. This is a good way to propagate. Simply cut a stem, remove the lower and bigger leaves and any flowers that may be starting, and then you just put the stems in water. In a week, you're going to have roots that look like this. It's a great way to accumulate more plants and to also grow indoors over the winter to plant again outside next spring. You do have to be mindful of any copyright restrictions. Now there's many plants that you can propagate this way, and that's another thing that you can research on your own. But for example, begonias are another plant that you can propagate and have several plants in the spring or bring in for the winter and make new cuttings to grow next year. To tidy up your space for winter, cut back perennials to a height of about 3 to 6 inches. Now, not all perennials like to be cut back completely, so it's easier to just leave a short amount on all of them to help you remember where they are. This not only looks better, but keeps insects and diseases away. If you see any disease already on your plants, do not use them in your cuttings in your compost. For example, hostas need to be cut back in the fall because they have problems with slugs and snails. Bee balm, zinnias, garden phlox, they often get powdery mildew. So the debris from these plants goes straight into the trash to prevent the problems from being reintroduced to the garden. You can leave some of your other foliage in place for winter interest and to give cover and food to birds, like your ornamental grasses, your purple coneflowers, and the black-eyed Susans. So while I was working at our project at Roane County Park, I noticed our irises were getting crowded and they needed to be thinned. So I'll explain a little bit about how I did that, and then in the next few slides you can see some videos taken showing how I did it. So there's at least 9 different types of irises. The Louisiana irises like their feet to be wet or moist. Irises can be separated as early as August and replanted to have blooms the following year. You can also separate them in the spring, but they usually won't bloom that same year. These plants spread quickly and need to be thinned out to get blooms about every 4 years or so. My first step was to cut down the stalks for easier digging. Man, I wish I could always work this fast. This type of iris is sturdy and spreads quickly. You can just use your shovel to dig them up, and you don't have to worry too much about the rhizomes. There's an abundance here. So I replanted bunches in several other places at our gardens at Roane County Park, and I took buckets home as well to pot up for our annual plant sale, which is the last Saturday in April at the Kingston City Park. When you go to plant the rhizomes, you plant them shallowly with the top just barely visible above the soil. You make sure that they stay moist. And they always do well planted near water or in a boggy area. I'm planting these in some pots for a plant sale, and be sure to keep them moist until they can be replanted. You can feed them in early spring with compost tea or diluted fish fertilizer. If your region has a sustained freeze, you can add mulch around the rhizomes. After spring blooms are spent, you cut back the stalks, but you allow the foliage to persist. These plants cannot tolerate being dried out. This is what the finished area looks like after thinning out the Louisiana irises, and what the blooms will look like next spring. It's also a good time to separate bearded irises. Now my neighbor has some beautiful white bearded irises. His wife always did the gardening and unfortunately passed away a few years ago. I always loved the white irises, and he allowed me to dig his up and separate them and replant some of them for him. So I'm going to show you how I did that. It's always good to plant the bearded irises up on a little mound and maybe plant 3 together in a triangle fashion to give on a really good show. This is what the irises look like about a month after separating. On the left are the bearded irises, and then on the right are the Louisiana irises, and I have them in a pan with water because I don't want them to dry out, and they're growing very well. Cannas are another great variety of plant to separate in the fall. You can do it in the spring as well, but you're more likely to get flowering plants if you do it in the fall. As you can see, there's lots of different varieties, and once you have one, you're going to have many because they do spread. But hey, that gives you more to share with others, right? Now I have a lot of the variety called Richard Wallace, and I transferred many of those to the gardens at Roane County Park. Where you live determines if you dig your cannas up for the winter or not. Cannas grown in zone 6 and colder will not overwinter in the ground and need to be stored. Cannas grown in zone 7 can be left in the ground with a little bit of mulch or blanket of leaves, keeping them warm throughout the winter. Cannas grown in zones 8 and warmer don't need to be wintered over. They can be left in the ground. I'm going to show you in the next couple slides how I separated cannas and planted them. You may have guessed I haven't learned how to have audio and video played at the same time on PowerPoint, so I hope you are being patient with my strategy. So first of all, you dig up your clump and you separate your tubers, and notice if there's any soft tubers, and you'll just clip those and discard them. You can tug apart, removing some of the soil and separating the roots. If you find a bad spot, just clip it off. It's better to clip off the stalk before you separate them if it's tall and you have a lot of leaves. It's just a lot easier. Cannas like full sun, but many will be doing fine in the partial shade. Plant your tubers just below the surface and mulch to keep them warm over the winter. Cannas and dahlias are borderline hardy, so in most cases we can leave them in the ground year-round here in Zone 7A.
Okay.
You can get close on my flipping and snipping.
we've got lots of cannas here at Roane County Park.
Got lots of what?
Cannas.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they all need to be cut back. So we've got the whole group of master gardeners here helping us at the park today. And this is one of the jobs we're doing. We're cutting back the cannas. We're cutting back some of the daylilies that have turned yellow and the irises. We're planting some new plants that we just purchased on a big sale. And we're going to do some leaf blowing. Lots of things to do.
If you're looking for cannas, Horn Canna Farm is one of my favorite places to shop. It's a family-owned business that has been in existence for 93 years. And they helped me identify a canna that I had planted at Roane County Park. So they have great customer service and great products, just FYI. Now we have one of my favorites, the daylily. You can grow them from seeds, cuttings, proliferation, and separation. I'm going to show you in the next 2 slides how I separate them. I was observing my garden and noticed that one of my plants had another plant growing on its stalk naturally. This is called proliferation. Once the stem starts to turn brown, you can see little roots forming around the plant that's growing on the stalk. Then it's time to cut the stem off and just put it in a pot. It will grow another plant just like the mother plant. Next, I dug up a big clump of daylilies. Now, daylilies need to be separated about every 4 years. They can grow dense, and when you notice that your plant is not performing as well as it used to, it's probably time to separate. You simply can take your shovel and cut them into sections, or you can try to pull them apart, depending on how dense they are. Now don't tell, but I used my husband's skinny long screwdriver to help me loosen up the rhizomes. I didn't have another garden tool handy, and you know what happened. There was a lot of twisting and pulling involved. But one thing you have to be careful of is not to damage the crowns, which is the little section just above the rhizomes where the leaves form. If you cut the crown off, the plant won't survive. Another way that you can separate your plants, if it's too hard to do manually, is to soak them in water for a day or so and let the soil loosen up around them, especially here in our Tennessee red clay. Once that happens, they're fairly easy to just pull apart. This is Sedum. It's a very low maintenance plant that grows and propagates easily. In fact, the less attention you give it, the better it does. It doesn't like a lot of watering or fertilizing. This variety is called the Autumn Joy, and it has a long vase life as well, I've noticed. It even starts to develop roots while it's in the water in your vase. And so then you can just take your plant and go put it back out in your yard somewhere if you want to grow another one. Now, spring propagation is best for this plant, but you can do it in the fall as long as you do it a few weeks before the first frost. As you can see, mine need to be separated. When you start to see that you have a hole in the middle of your plant and they're flopping over, it's due to a few reasons. I could tell that mine needed to be separated because it had been there for several years. But it can also be due to not enough light, not enough sun, and over fertilizing. As you just saw, I first cut back all the stalks, and then I dug up the plant and just simply used a shovel to divide. I also used one of the stalks, actually I used most of them, dipped them in hormone growth and stuck them in a pot. Now the reason I decided to divide mine in the fall was because I want to winter over several for our plant sale. Now I've also, in the spring, just basically cut a stalk off the plant and stuck it right in the ground, and it grew. I didn't even put any growth hormone on it. So they're very durable plants, very easy to grow, and they look great in your garden flowering in the fall. Something to add a little interest after all the summer blooms are over. Here we have Hellebores, also known as Linton roses or Christmas rose. They mainly grow in zones 5 to 8. They like the shade, and they're an evergreen woodland plant, and it flowers really early, even before your bulbs. They need good drainage, and there's like, I don't know, 30 plus varieties. These are best to divide in the fall, but they can be divided in early spring as well, before they bloom. Dividing gives you the assurance that you will have the same plant as the parent plant. Now, if you collect the seeds and transplant seedlings that are growing nearby, you may not have an identical plant. When they start putting on new growth in the spring, you can cut back the old leaves that look old and worn. They are pest and deer resistant. Now, our plants at Roane County Park were planted probably over 5 years ago. They started to get large and overcrowded. So I decided to go ahead and dig some of these up and separate them. First, you cut back the old leaves, that so I could actually see the plant better where I was digging. And then I dug the plant up and I just used my shovel to separate the plants. I replanted part of the plant back into the flower bed, then added more to other areas of our garden. Plus, I harvested 13 more plants from this area and even had some left over to use at our plant sale. Here's the before and after photos of the area where we have our hellebores. Now, in actuality, hellebores really don't need to be separated unless you want to propagate and have more plants. So if you plan on keeping your plant in one area, just give it plenty of space to grow. Our area started getting overcrowded and you couldn't really see the flowers as well as we wanted to. So we decided that it would be good to separate them and spread them out a little bit better than the way we had them. After the first frost, it's time to dig up your Caladium and Gladiola bulbs. You'll know when it's time because the plants will turn brown and look bad. In the next slide, you'll see one of my fellow master gardeners, Lucy, digging up some Caladium bulbs that we planted earlier this year. We started with 5 and we ended up with more than 20 bulbs to plant next year. Just dig around the plant, pull up the root ball, and dig around for the Caladium bulbs. Store the bulbs in a cool, dry place over the winter and replant next spring. So why do we want to divide our plants anyways? Well, there's a couple reasons. You might have an aggressive spreading plant and you need to divide it to prevent it from taking over your garden. Or you might have some of those dead centers in your plants, or your plant isn't performing as well as it used to. Or maybe you just want to have more plants to fill in the holes in other areas of your garden, or to even give away. It's best to do this work early enough in the fall, if you're going to do it in the fall, so that you have approximately 4 weeks to reestablish the roots before there's a hard frost. Now, another strategy that you can think of about dividing your plants and when to do it is that the plants that you have that bloom in the fall are best to be separated in the spring. And the plants that bloom early spring or summer are best to divide in the fall. After you've transplanted, it's very important to mulch and water. This gives the plants the best chance to get reestablished. Newly purchased plants and perennials also need to be mulched. Just mulch up to the crown of the plant, but don't bury them. This is the last plant I'm going to show you how I separated. And another big reason for separating your plants is it absolutely saves you money. So I love peony plants as well, and I found this pink Hawaiian coral peony that I just loved, and so I decided to order it online. And I got this little bitty root that is in relation to that dime, not very big, for Well, the retail price was over $22, but I have to say I did get it on sale. So, you know, you might want to separate your plants just because of your budget. This is my idea of how I'm going to store my plants over winter. I got the idea from looking around at the nursery and seeing how they store some of their trees. And I noticed that they had pots that were buried in the ground to keep the trees warm. And so I thought, well, heck, I got a raised bed vegetable garden. This is where I had my tomatoes planted, and it's just sitting there during the winter. So I'll clean it out and bury my pots inside the soil of the raised beds. So here we have the Japanese irises and the sedum. And I put some straw around the sedum just to keep them a little warmer. But never use hay, always use straw, because straw doesn't have the seeds in it like hay does. You could use pine straw or mulch or just take your luck without using anything. But I thought it would keep the weeds down as well. So it's looking pretty good. I hope I have good luck with it. It's just something I wanted to try. I think it'll work. Let you know. I wanted to show you a close-up of what the sedum looks like as they're put in the raised beds. There's a lot of plants there, and it's all for the plant sale. I hope you can come.
Okay, so another thing we're doing here at Roane County Park is we're transplanting our St. John's wort. If you haven't ever grown it before, it's a pretty aggressive plant, so don't plant it where you don't want it to spread. We're going to dig it up and plant it in another area and plant some penstemon and some other things in this spot. So we have all kinds of helpers here today. We're going to dig up our sun patience over here. And as you can see, the hostas have turned yellow, and we want to get rid of those to prevent the slugs and snails from getting into them and causing a problem next year. and they just get real slimy, and it's hard to do in the spring, so it's better just to get rid of that particular plant. The grasses here will leave. They look good throughout the winter in most cases. If yours turns yellow and starts looking poorly, you can go ahead and cut them down to the ground. You can even use your weed whacker. But we like to leave some of our things up for the winter. So I was mentioning before that you need to remove your zinnias in the fall when they start to turn brown. And so that's what we're doing here. We have our daylilies planted amongst the zinnias, and we're also going to remove some of this Coleus that's already turned poor. But we have some dahlias growing here that we just planted first year, and we're going to leave those and winter them over with some of the leaves that we have, which are plenty in this area. But it's pretty easy to just pull these zinnias up just by the base of the plant and tidy up your garden area. So sometimes you get a plant that decides to grow in your flower bed that you didn't really put there, and it was a nice little surprise, and you want to save it. So we've gotten some butterfly bushes that have shown up in our raised beds, and we're digging those up, and we're going to transplant them somewhere else or possibly save at the plant sale. So there's always a place to put a plant.
Another thing I learned about gardening from my being a master gardener is to get my soil tested. Now, lots of people just put on recommended fertilizers, but if you get your soil tested, you can find out exactly what kind of fertilizer your lawn or your gardens need, and it's really inexpensive, and the turnaround is pretty quick. And as you can see, you get a pretty detailed report about it, and you can talk to your extension agent about it, and they'll give you some detailed information on how to take your samples and what to expect and how to read your report. There's a soil, plant, and pest page on Facebook that you can refer to, and then there's also a website that I've listed here for you. But it helps the environment greatly when you don't use more fertilizers than you need, and plus it saves you money. Let's talk about that four-letter word, weed. Oh Lord, I have so many of them. The only thing I've learned is that you just have to keep up with it. You have to weed your garden once a week at least, or walk around your yard and see what needs to be done so you can keep up with it. If you have time to weed your garden in the fall and test your soil and mulch, you'll be ready to plant in the spring. So I'm going to show you some things I did with my garden beds. And what happened was, of course, you might have experienced this yourself. I went on vacation for a couple weeks and came back to a gigantic garden full of weeds. So it's disheartening. I guess the birds do us that favor, maybe the rabbits and other creatures. But I decided just to dig up all of the plants I had in my garden and try to dig out as much of the weeds that I could. And this type of weed, some people call it morning glories, but I think they're known as bindweed, and it's understandable because they just wrap themselves around everything and basically kill everything in their path, choke your plants out. So I wanted to try to get rid of it. So I dug it all up and I transplanted my plants and moved them to another area. And then I covered the whole bed up with cardboard and threw an old tarp that I had on top of it. The reason I used both is because the tarp was old and had some holes in it. So I just didn't want any sunlight to get through to allow weeds to grow. So this is a type of weeding called solar weeding, and you can use whatever you have if you've got a tarp at home, or you can just use clear plastic. But basically the sun is heating the garden up to kill those weeds.
We had our first freeze last night. It's November 6th, so pretty late for us here in Zone 7A in Tennessee. And I decided I was going to try to salvage some of my plants that can be a house plant or an outdoor plant during the summer. And this is one of those polka dot little plants. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut back these long stems and you can see I have some little starts here that are going to grow into a nice plant. And I'll just pot that up. And bring that inside. And then next spring, when the temperatures get warm enough, and here it's probably mid-April, I can set that back outside for an enjoyable plant for the yard.
Fall is the time to plant your bulbs. I would encourage you to get them early though, especially if you want specific ones. Order them online or get them from your garden center or box stores. It's so nice to see your flowering bulbs in the spring, just when everything is waking up after a cold winter. Now, I've had my share of critters eating my bulbs, and that is so frustrating. I'm doing a few things to avoid that. You can plant daffodils and jonquils among your tulips because they are poisonous. As a side note, Narcissus is the genus. Daffodils and jonquils are a species of that genus. Daffodils are lighter and have flat blades. Jonquils have more rounded blades and darker foliage. You can also plant bitter things among your tulips like Swiss chard or even basil. You can cover your ground with chicken wire after you plant your bulbs and then cover it with mulch. You can plant your bulbs in pots to keep the critters out. That really worked well for me.
So here we are, and as you can see, I've planted a lot of violas. I love to plant violas and pansies in the fall. They do really well in the cooler weather, and then they'll bloom again in the spring. Now when it gets really hot, like June, July, they will die off. So they are annuals, but they will do 2 seasons, fall and spring, when you plant them in the fall. I also wanted to demonstrate how to propagate the begonia. So I have the begonia stem, and each place you see a node is an area where you can cut, but you need at least 2 nodes to root a new begonia plant. So I'm going to take a cutting and include, here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 nodes. I'll just clean it up a little bit, dip it in some growth hormone, and pop it in to a little pot. And this should grow another begonia just like this beautiful one. These did really well this year in my yard. Now I also wanted to talk a little bit about how I'm layering my pots. Last year I tried for the first time planting bulbs in my pots, and they did beautifully. And I went ahead and planted these plants over the bulbs when they were done blooming. And now that these plants are finishing up, I'm planting my violas and my pansies and leaving my bulbs in there to bloom next spring. And these plants will be blooming next spring as well, so they'll be kind of like an underplant to the bulbs that get taller. And I can't wait to see what kind of effect that will have. I like to try new things. It may work, it may not. I've got a lot of little seedlings growing here. I don't really know what they are, where they came from. So I'm gonna wait and see. And I can't seem to bear to cut down my impatiens right now. They did really well.
Well, I didn't have time to cover everything that you can do in the fall. There's always something more. But I hope I have given you some tips and ideas that will help you with your gardens. You can check out some other things like crop cover for your vegetable gardens or planting garlic in the fall. Maybe I've inspired you to propagate some of your perennials or to try something new. Phew, that was a lot of work, but a passion of love for me. Now it's time for me to relax and look at my magazines and catalogs, dream about next year, order some seeds, and start it all over again next year. Happy gardening, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out your local extension office and their Master Gardener program.